Yo, what is up? You have found I Like the Blazers. I am your host, Brandon Goldner, and I'm stoked to have Blazers beat reporter Casey Holdahl on the show. Casey, what's up, man?
Not much, Brandon. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, it's the holidays. Like, I'm feeling pretty festive, even all things considered. We just got our Christmas tree, got some lights up. So yeah, it's feeling kind of festive right here.
You know, with COVID and with all of the holidays kind of being scuttled, you know, you got to kind of lean in a little bit to some of your traditions. And yeah, we're not typically big on decorating the house. We actually went a few years without even getting a tree. Though we've kind of moved back in that direction. But yeah, we made a concerted effort to like put up more stuff, get our tree earlier this year, because it's like, man, everything's such a bummer. Like, let's do whatever we can to kind of get into the spirit of the season. So yeah, so that's what we're doing over here in North Portland.
That's what we did too. It's like we've never gotten our tree this early, like ever. And Cassie has done a ton of Christmas shopping. I've done like a decent amount of mine where I'm usually putting off, but yeah, it's like wherever you can find comfort. Well, speaking of COVID, something that's not super comfortable. I mean, you have been a reporter with the Blazers since 2007. And unlike a lot of people who cover the NBA, you're in the scrums, you're on the planes, you're in the hotels, you're at the practices. So like you're getting to see the interpersonal dynamics. Like when people talk about team culture and leadership, you know, you're one of the few people who can actually speak about that firsthand and how that kind of manifests itself and how that actually shows up with the team. And so considering that, I was curious, like, what are the biggest and most impactful ways that your job has changed since March and since COVID has hit?
Well, I mean, you just kind of prefaced part of it. First off, proximity. You know, whereas before I would spend a lot of time at the practice facility, a lot of time at the arena, a lot of time, you know, in the hotels on the road, at practices on the road. And, you know, all that stuff has basically gone away. Now, I think some of it's going to come back here in this upcoming season, you know, assuming that the best laid plans go the way that the NBA hopes. But you know, the biggest change has been that, like, you don't get the interpersonal interaction with the players and the coaches that you would typically get, you know, in the non-COVID times. And that really, you know, that really puts a cap on what you can accomplish in terms of your coverage. You know, the way it works right now, I mean, everyone's trying their best. You know, the organization is doing everything they can to make guys available. But, you know, you basically, we get 2 or 3 players on Zoom. You interview those players with all the rest of the local media. You don't typically know who is going to be available that day. So it's hard to plan to like write a story or to even come up with a bunch of questions, because it's like, I don't know who we're going to get to talk to today. So it makes it a little hard to do kind of some of the pre-planning you would have done before. You also have to be much more kind of focused in terms of your job, because you know you're only going to have, you know, maybe 2 questions to ask somebody. So you really need to try to go in with a good idea of what you're going to accomplish, and then go and execute it. So that way you put yourself in a situation where you can achieve the right at the end of the day. So, you know, that's kind of the biggest thing, is just not having that ability to talk to players, talk to coaches, particularly in a more intimate setting. Like, I mean, the guys have been great. You know, I feel like the players and the coaches have been forthright. But, you know, particularly for someone like myself, I would say probably someone like Jason, you know, when you've worked with the same group of guys for a long time, you build those relationships, you know, that you put a lot of time building. You know, when those goes away, it does affect your coverage. And so someone from like myself, who has been around for a long time and has built those relationships, you know, I don't get to necessarily utilize that the way I would have, you know, in regular seasons. And, you know, if you're someone who maybe, you know, covers the team, but not necessarily on a day-to-day, that's probably not as big of an issue. But if you're someone who has been in the thick of it for, you know, over a decade now, and again, like a lot of these guys, I've known them their entire NBA careers at this point, you know, that makes it difficult to get close to reaching the level of coverage that you might have been at before COVID.
Well, I would imagine that like some of what you end up writing about, like there may be interactions you have just kind of, you know, kind of casually and you might put pieces together from interactions you had in like weeks and months past, and those won't really manifest until you actually write about it later, and you're kind of missing that now. I mean, are you going to be in arena when the preseason starts, which I think it's this Friday, isn't it? I mean, it's coming up.
It is this Friday. I've kind of taken a stance that until something happens in 2020, I don't assume that it is going to happen.
Yeah, that's probably safe.
The plan is to be in arena, yes. So, and I don't know what the broader plan is, but I'm getting tested every day. So I will be able to go to games in person and potentially travel with the team at some point in time this season. We'll see how that goes. But
nice.
So in theory and in plan, yes, I will be there. The access will still be much different. There won't be, I don't think, any interaction with players and coaches. I think that'll still be via Zoom, though they might do it like they did in the Orlando bubble, which is where you had the Zoom interviews, but you also had people off on the side asking questions in person. I hope that's the case because being able to actually look someone in the eye, and particularly there's a couple guys in the team where, I have very good relationships with them, and they generally know kind of what I'm getting at when I ask them a question that you might not be able to pick that up in person. So, so I'm hopeful that there will be that opportunity. But, Brandon, to be perfectly honest, like this thing got thrown together so quickly that, until things actually happen, like I don't know that anyone is actually positive how things are going to shake out. They've got plans, they've got tiers. Like again, they've thought about it a lot, but until the rubber meets the road on Friday versus the Kings, in a nationally televised game, by the way, too, it's kind of hard to figure what is going to happen. So I'm hopeful that's the plan, but we'll see what happens come Friday.
Well, I mean, obviously, and people are going to get the virus and things are going to have to change at some point. How much, we don't know yet, right? I think everyone's doing their best. I mean, here's something, too, like with my work, there have been some changes because of COVID and obviously it is horrible in a million different ways, but there have been some changes that have come about by utilizing technology that maybe companies just didn't think about doing before. I'm just curious if there's anything about this environment we're working in now that maybe it forced some changes in how you get to do your work or approach your work that were not happening before, but now because of COVID have opened it up. Like, is there anything about this virtual environment? It's like, we really needed this tool, and for whatever reason, like we just didn't use it. Now we're forced to use it. Like, has anything good come from this, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, for one, it doesn't really affect me all that much because I was already working from home when I wasn't on the road anyways. But I think as an organization, particularly the business side of the organization, we have found that being in the office is maybe not as important as we thought it was. And I mean, I think eventually we're going to get back to that. But I do think there was a realization that, hey, some of this stuff that we do in the office, we could probably just take care of in other ways, and it would probably be more efficient. And it gives people flexibility that I think they do appreciate. And I agree. It's not like we want to be in the situation, but there are some things you can take from it. The other thing, though, just from a fan's perspective is, while it might be more difficult at times to conduct those interviews over Zoom, particularly a group interview over Zoom, you do have that archived, and you can make that available to fans. We have streamed quite a few of them as well on trailblazers.com, on Facebook, on Twitter. And, that provides fans an opportunity basically in real time to hear what the players are talking about. And that's something that we were doing way back when we tried trailblazers.tv, which, so for me, it's like seeing these Zoom interviews. It's almost like, man, this is like 10 years ago when, we were trying to do live video before anyone was trying to do live video. We really, by the way, we were just a little bit too early on that one. Shout out to Dan Harbison. If we had been a few years later, we'd have been set up just right. But we hit that streaming thing a little too soon, and it overwhelmed us. So that has been one positive, though, is that, and it also has opened up access a little bit as well. It's not as good of access as those of us who are used to it are accustomed to. But if you're someone who, has a 9-to-5 job and maybe can't get to games as often as you would like, can't go to practices as often as you would like, the ability to log on Zoom and be a part of those media sessions when you would have maybe not been able to do that prior, I mean, that's a good thing, obviously. So I think it does kind of open up the least opportunity for more voices to kind of be involved in it, though we already have a lot of people coming to Trailblazers anyways, probably more than any other team, at least in terms of maybe not full time, but at least in terms of like people being interested and wanting to kind of produce content, we got to be up there with top 5 or 6 in the league, because Blazer fans actually care a lot more than anybody else or every other team. So, but yeah, so that democratization, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, there have been, I just like, there's going to be things that even after we're done with COVID, again, they've been stress tested. Now we're probably going to keep doing them moving forward. Kind of going back to that, the sense that you get as a reporter and the feel you have of the team, they've made some pretty big additions this year with Robert Covington, Derek Jones Jr. They re-signed Carmelo Anthony. Rodney Hood is going to be healthy to start the season. So is Nurkic. Zach Collins will be back at some point, probably shortly after the new year. So this Blazers team is going to be better. And I'm just curious, kind of with your access to the team, you've gotten a sense of the ebb and the flow, maybe not of the team's confidence, because this team's always been pretty confident under Damian Lillard, but the ebb and flow of expectations that this team has for itself. And I'm thinking, kind of the end of the LaMarcus Batum, Matthews, Lopez era. Fans like me, we could feel that team had a shot at the title. And, we got that sense because they were playing the games and they were winning, right? And you could start to see that confidence build. But, I wonder if maybe someone like in your position maybe got a sense that team knew earlier than other folks before they started winning so many games and found themselves at the top of the NBA, that team kind of knew that they had something there. And I know it's still like really early in this season and things are weird because of COVID, but I'm just curious, do you get any sense at all with, who's healthy and the additions that they've made, that does this team have high expectations for itself? And do you think this team do they feel like they have the right combination of players to make something happen this year? Is that something that you're getting a sense of at all? Please say yes.
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why.
That's fair. No,
and it's not because I don't. It's not because I think they don't think they're good. I do think that they believe that. It's because of what happened last season. So 2 seasons ago, they go to the Western Conference Finals. They get swept by the Golden State Warriors, but they're lacking Yusuf Nurkic. So they feel like the season next. So last season, they're like, we're coming into this thing. It's Western Conference Finals or bust. We're going to go out there and we have quality and we're good and we've shown it. We're not that little upstart team anymore. We're going to go out there and show our worth. And it didn't work out. Obviously, everyone knows season last year between injuries and just some of the moves they made just did not work out very well. Had to fight and scrape even to get to the playoffs. And so I think they're a little gun shy from that situation. The team had generally been one that was like, let's downplay our expectations. Let's not be boastful. Let's just say, hey, we're a good team. We believe in ourselves. We're going to go out there and show it on the court. Last year, it was a little bit different. It was more like, well, maybe we need to carry ourselves with like more of a, no, we're a good team and we expect to be at the upper echelons of the West. And then when that didn't pan out, I think there's been a kind of recalibration now to where it's like, you know what? It's probably just better to go into these seasons feeling like, hey, we know we're good. We have a good team. We're better than we were last season. We like where we're at. But let's not necessarily go out there and say it's Western Conference Finals or bust. It's even home court or bust. I think for the team, it's more like, let's not be in the play-in, and then anything other than that, let's just see where the chips fall. So, and the other part of that too is, talking about the Zoom interviews, I think if people watch Damian when he was talking in Media Week about kind of where he felt like the team was at, I feel like he was a bit muted in that because he's seen it before. Like he's come into seasons and been like, this team is good. Like we can do it. We're there. We're just as good as any of these other teams that everyone else is saying is a lot better than us. And it hasn't always panned out. So I think for him, he's really at the point where he's like, hey man, if this is going to happen, like we got to go out and do it. This idea that like, well, we're being disrespected or people aren't giving us the credit that we deserve. It's like, yeah, maybe, but also we barely made the playoffs last season. Also, we got swept as a 3 seed by the Pelicans. So, like, while they do have a belief in themselves, it's also colored a bit by the notion that, like, hey, but we've also felt that way before, and it didn't shake out the way we thought it was. So I think they're really more of, and particularly, in a COVID season as well, it's really more of kind of a wait and see approach to how things go. And again, like
there's so
I know
much
that
uncertainty.
Really
I mean,
yeah, exactly. It's like so to come out and be like, we're going to be this team when we already got one guy who's out with COVID, and Nurk has had some family issues, and he's only recently just gotten back. And we did just change over a lot of our roster from a season where we changed over a lot of the roster already. And we are relying on some young guys to really take a next step. And we're just assuming that guys like Robert Covington and Derek Jones Jr. are just going to easily kind of fold into our situation in a season where you have a training camp that's going to be like a week and a half. So you can see where they're coming from. I don't think it's got anything to do with like a lack of confidence or talent. It's just more like an idea of what do we gain from really being forward about how good we think we are. Let's just take a step back and let our play on the court kind of prove that for us.
That seems fair. I mean, and when I created this spreadsheet trying to guess at what the minutes breakdown might be, and it's really tough to fudge around with it and like get enough minutes for everyone that you think the organization wants to develop, and then balancing that with wanting to be a really good team. But what became clear to me pretty quickly is that, I mean, this team is, they can roll 11 deep with people who've played NBA games before and can be at least reasonably reliable. So the way I think about it, it seems like the floor on this team is at least somewhat stable. I mean, particularly in the regular season where the games are so compressed and you might have to miss games because of COVID. I think having enough players on the roster, again, who have the ability to play NBA games and not be a complete dumpster fire makes it so their floor is a little bit higher. I mean, would you say that's a fair statement, at least?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's a fair statement to say that they think that they're a much better team than they were last year, and they think that they could get, as high as 2 or 3 in the West. It's just they're going to be a bit more muted about it this season. And, I do think that. What was the first part of that question? Actually, I want to make sure I answered properly.
Oh, no, you did. It was just the first part of the question was just, does this team feel like they are special in a way that maybe people like me couldn't see on the outside? It sounds like, I mean, with so much uncertainty, it's just like that's not something that they would want to go there with. Yeah,
and again, and I think with, with the injuries they also had last year as well, I think that there's just there's an acceptance that like, hey, we can put this thing together just right, or we can feel like we've got something going just the way we want to, but a lot of things can happen in between.
And it wouldn't matter.
The other part, and it wouldn't matter. The other thing too, I remember that I just wanted to get to was you talked about minutes, and the idea last season was that, and Terry actually said it in training camp. It was basically, I mean, he's usually very regimented about his rotation, particularly his starting lineup. And last season, he basically came out and said, like, hey, with the talent we have on this team, we might change things up from a night-to-night basis because, maybe on one night we'll need a bigger lineup. Maybe on some nights we should play smaller lineups, and you might start one night and then potentially not even play the next day. And with the way things happened with injuries, that obviously never happened. But they're coming into this season with the same idea, which is that, like, yeah, it does look like we've got quite a few guys on the wing, and going from trying to figure out like, hey, how can we play someone less than 40 minutes to how can we get a guy 15 minutes this season? One of the ways I think they're going to deal with that is they are probably going to be much more willing to experiment in terms of lineups and starting lineups even as season goes on. One, because I think they feel like they have the talent to do that. And two, as you mentioned, in a condensed season, they're literally playing every other day. I don't think they ever have more than 2 days off in a row. That's the kind of season where you're going to need to give guys, if not a full night off, at least, lighter duties. So I think this is definitely the season where you probably don't concern yourself too much with, well, how is so-and-so going to get minutes, because you're going to need those bodies. And the other part too that we found is that, they went into last season feeling maybe not like they were stocked at the forward positions, but, they're like, well, we got Hoodie, we got Zach, we got Powell, And then, you lose all three of those guys, and Powell you never even end up seeing. And all of a sudden you're like,
on the team in the first place.
I typically don't bring it up, but when I'm recounting like what their forward situation was last year going into the season, you do count Powell because they did think that he was going to be able to play. Obviously, it didn't shake out that way. So to go from that situation and being like, heck, we got to sign Carmelo Anthony and start him because we don't have the bodies, to maybe Carmelo doesn't even play on a night-to-night basis, depending on what the matchup is. I mean, that's how they go about taking care of that problem. And again, it's one of those situations where, it's the problem you would much rather have compared to last season, which was, we don't have anyone on this team. We have one guy on this team who's taller than 6'9".
We're calling out Brandon Goldner to come play minutes on the team.
I think we were close, man.
One more quick minutes question. Maybe I missed it. Have they talked about Dame and CJ maybe getting fewer minutes? I mean, Dame played like 38 minutes a game last year. I mean, again, with the condensed season and the possibility of losing people due to COVID, like, are they thinking about what his minutes load might be, or is that not really something they've been talking about?
I mean, they've only mentioned it in regards to backup point guard. So, when Neil O'Shea was doing, his yearly media availability, he basically, he was asked about, well, why didn't you go out and sign a backup point guard? And he was like, well, one, Anthony Simons is a backup point guard. And two, I think it was something like 97 or 94% of all of our possessions start with either Damian or CJ. Ergo, why would we bring in someone to be a backup point guard if they're only going to end up playing 10 minutes a night? And we already like Anthony Simons anyway. So what that tells me is they're doubling down on their minutes, basically, to say like, no, they play this many minutes, they like playing that many minutes, and that's what we're going to stick with. And I think that something that fans and media have debated about in terms of the Blazers for a while. Is it really sustainable to have, especially Damian and to a lesser extent CJ, playing the minutes that they play and always being in the top 5 in minutes played every single season? And I think the stance of the organization has been, that's what we're going to roll with. I mean,
they've needed to play those minutes to win games. I mean,
exactly. I mean, I think, if you were going to devil's advocate it, you'd say like, well, if you had a better backup point guard, maybe you wouldn't need them to play those minutes. But the fact is, I mean, Damian's going to play 36 minutes. CJ is going to play 36 minutes. So that basically leaves 12 minutes. And again, like I'm not arguing against the importance of backup point guards. And I think the Anthony Simons will do just fine. And I know that they're super high on him, and they have some goals for him this season, particularly in terms of him just kind of paving his own way that I think they're really excited about. But I mean, the fact is that, the two best players on the team are both, high usage ball dominant guards. And, they've had some success utilizing those two guys, and they're going to continue to do it until, I guess, until one of them can't play those kind of minutes anymore.
Yep. Well, speaking of CJ's minutes and this last question, then we'll get you out of here. I was listening to the Locked On Blazers podcast with Mike Richmond, and he floated the idea, not that CJ will make the All-Star team, but that the circumstances in the West and the Blazers may line themselves up to give CJ the best chance he's had so far to make the All-Star team. And, part of his logic was with Westbrook leaving, with Harden probably on his way out and probably going to the Eastern Conference, with maybe Chris Paul and Devin Booker cannibalizing themselves a little bit, being on the same team, and the Blazers getting better as a team, that maybe there is some room for a player like CJ McCollum. Let's say he has a slightly better year this year. Let's say the Blazers are tracking to be like a top 2, top 3 team in the West, that maybe CJ would get some All-Star consideration. I'm just curious what you think about that. And again, not to say that, like he's has a super good chance of making the All-Star team, but just that question of, he might have the best chance he's ever had. Like, what do you think about that?
I think, as usual, that's a pretty astute point from Mike. On one hand, I mean, and you didn't even mention Klay Thompson as well, who is going to be out. He was out last season as well, but that's another guy who would basically pencil in as an all-star if he's healthy, and he's not going to be there. So, I think the issue with CJ is not that he's not an all-star caliber player. It's just that, the West is stacked, and there are a lot of great players, and a lot of them happen to be guards. And he's a guy who doesn't play another position, so he can't do like the Luka Doncic, which is, being available or being able to get voted in as a guard and a forward. Same thing with a guy like LeBron. Now, granted, LeBron could still be an all-star, but just the idea that, like, particularly in the West, particularly when there's a lot of competition for a very small number of slots, if you're not a verified number one guy, which CJ isn't because that's Damian, then you basically have to have something break right for you. So you have to play multiple positions. You have to be on a team that is one or two or just running roughshod through other teams. You have to put up ridiculous stats. You have to be a guy who's going to play in different events. Now, granted, that's not going to be an issue this season because there's not going to be an actual game. Yeah. But you always have a better shot of making the actual All-Star game if you're competing in the three-point contest or the dunk contest. So, but Mike is right in that, you lose Westbrook. I think at this point, while Chris Paul and Devin Booker might cannibalize each other a little bit, I think Devin Booker is already to a point where, like, people are looking to get him into the game. So if nothing else, I actually think he probably has improved his chances of them making it. Maybe they give Chris Paul a pity vote, but also I think Chris Paul's been on enough teams at this point and known enough players and coaches where I don't know the guys are like super pulling for him or anything anymore. So so you figure like Damian's a shoe-in, Steph's a shoe-in, LeBron. I'm thinking mostly guards or Doncic. I would say Booker is almost for sure going to be there.
Donovan Mitchell.
He made it
last year.
And then guy that the Warriors just traded to the Timberwolves. D'Angelo Russell. I mean, like, I'm not saying those guys are locks, but I mean, there's a lot of guys who are in that conversation. I like how you knew his social media tag without his name. Yeah, well, I just saw too that. Then literally the reason it popped into my mind is because I saw that he's got some clothing line on Leaning that's coming out, and I just saw some of the images of it today, and I was like, hey,
right, yeah.
Stuff isn't that bad actually. So that's for sure. That's why it refreshed my mind. So yeah, I mean, I think that CJ's probably got a better case than he's ever had, assuming that he plays at a level that we're accustomed to seeing CJ play at. But you get down to the numbers, you start crunching them, and they've also really loosened up on allowing coaches basically just to vote for whoever they want to vote for. They don't really care so much about positions anymore, or at least not to the extent they used to. So you don't get in through the fan vote. I mean, that's an impossibility. And then, you're having to fight with guys, with every 6'8" guy who is scoring 20 and grabbing 8 rebounds a night. And, at a certain point, it's like, unless the Blazers have a great record, it's probably hard to put 2 guys in. So a good chance, but it really probably does come down to how well the team plays.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that the coaches get to vote on 2 guards and, like you said, 2 at-large players or positionless. That would be rad though. If that happens, or even if that gets close, something's going right. And
CJ's kind of guy too, where like CJ would take an All-Star game seriously. He's got a game that is kind of All-Star worthy. Like he's got the tricks that I think people like to see. So like, CJ in an All-Star game to me makes a whole lot of sense. He talks some trash, so like he's got a lot of things going for him. It's just that he plays on a team where he's the second best guard on the team, so it's always going to make it a little bit tough to get into that game again, unless they just go on some Golden State 73 win season kind of run, and then in that case, then you're talking about 3 guys. Like then you're like, hey, what's Nurk doing? Like what are his numbers like at that point? So that's a pipe dream, but I do think that both those guys are good enough to be all-stars. It's just a numbers game.
Yeah, for sure. From your lips to God's ears, 3 all-stars. Woo! With that, Casey, man, I always appreciate your time. Thank you. If people wanted to connect with you and check out your work, how would they do that?
Blazers.com/forward-center. You can check out me on Twitter. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I'm on Twitter at CHold. And also I'm on Instagram, which I would much more recommend, at Casey Holdahl, HOLDAHL. And that's it so far. I haven't gotten on TikTok yet. I've been reluctant, but my wife is on it and she loves it, so I'll probably start TikTok.
You don't have that Parler account yet?
Yeah, no, I will. I'll be staying away from the social media specific to whatever your ideological bent is, which is probably the nicest way I can say that.
It's probably a good move. Cool, Casey. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you again to Casey Holdahl of the Trailblazers. Appreciate him taking the time. And yeah, that's it for this week. Probably going to have another episode coming up in just a couple days. Actually, we definitely are. It's going to be featuring Keith Feltner-Smith of the Trailcasters, my former podcasting partner in crime. So please check that out. And yeah, remember to check out Casey's work at trailblazers.com. And if you want to follow this podcast, you can always do that at ILiketheBlazers.com or at ILiketheBlazers on Twitter or Facebook. You can hit me up on Twitter at GoldnerPDX. And yeah, until next time, excited for the season to start, at least the preseason starting Friday. Yeah, I am Brandon Goldner, and yeah, appreciate you all. Thank you for listening, and go Blazers. See ya. the starting, I don't know, like the.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
Yeah, the intro thing just seems so.
Your high energy intro when you already just did it in front of the person you're doing it again. Yeah, no, I understand.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, no,
yep.
For sure.
Yep.
Okay.